Okay. Test. I will do a 1 moment. Ay, ay, ay. Vamos. Ay. Almost there. Okay, a clap for audio sync. I use a backup recorder in case this thing screws up. Okay, so first thing, can you just say a few words, and I'll say a few words. I just want to make sure that the levels between us are somewhat matched, because usually I wind up being way lower than the other person.
Okay, my name is Willie Cade. I live at 3642 North Springfield Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 60618.
All right, so how does this sound, everybody, in the live chat before I get started? Am I too loud? Is he too loud? What do you all think? Let's see. Come on. Come on. Yeah, my God, yeah. Lower Willie about 3 dB. Okay.
Wow.
Look
Good
at that.
feedback.
That is precise. Okay. All right. And I will get my other recorder on and get started. All right, everybody. I am here live with Willie Cade, a much requested interview. His grandfather was actually an engineer at John Deere back in the day when they cared about their customers. He is an avid supporter of right to repair and much of what's going on here. He has said that it should not be impossible or illegal for people to fix what they own. People should be allowed to decide how to spend their own money. So just for me getting started in this, I remember in 2017 going to Nebraska to testify on behalf of Right to Repair, and I was very confused because Gay Gordon Burns sat me down with a bunch of farmers, and I thought, like, did we take a wrong turn and wind up at, like, right to corn or something? I had no idea how this is all intertwined because I spent most of my time in Brooklyn. We don't even have lawns and backyards here, much less tractors or farm equipment, so I have very limited exposure to this. So before we even get into the security concerns that there's going to be a lot to discuss there, can you just kind of discuss briefly how it is that farmers are being screwed over by the current system when it comes to being able to fix their own tractors?
Sure. It's actually pretty simple. Back in around 2015, John Deere started putting lots of different manufacturers started putting a lot of software onto tractors. And one of the things that they decided to do was to require a driver that only John Deere corporate, not the dealers, could install after a new part went on. So the nickname on it is called VIN burn. So they VIN burn their parts, which is very astute from their corporate point of view because it levels out their revenues with repair and makes them reliable. If you always have to use John Deere to repair your equipment, John Deere is always going to have revenue. And repair revenue is anti-cyclical to new sale equipment revenue. So this makes their stock look great at John Deere.
Yeah, I've noticed that John Deere stock over the past year and a half has just been it almost looks like a GameStop chart when you take a look at it. So, what are one of the things that we hear a lot when it comes to consumer electronics right to repair: security, privacy, safety. Security, privacy, safety. They're always talking about how the security is going to be decreased as a result of right to repair passing, but they never give specific examples ever. And I remember hearing Kevin Kenny at one of the Nebraska hearings earlier this year saying, "You're talking about security. Lots of these devices use Windows CE. I wouldn't take this if you paid me to." And it's a good example because like a lot of these devices are running an operating system that has not received a security update in 8 years. Now, there's a lot of really interesting things that have gone on over the past few months with cybersecurity, with regards to just how easy it is to get access to things like VIN numbers, whether the lease has been paid off on a tractor over the using really rudimentary tactics. Can you talk a little bit about what's been going on over the past 3 months with security and John Deere products?
Sure. I've been part of a group that's been working on trying to assess what is the security level, particularly John Deere, but International Harvester, Case, and other ag manufacturers. And they're pretty classical old line company that's coming to software late, and their implementations are poor, to say the least. And what's happening is that they're doing a pretty bad job of it, and that is exposing people, I mean, particularly farmers and ranchers, exposing them to cybersecurity risks that they've never had before. John Deere wants to have all of the data come to them in real time off of the equipment. But what they didn't do was shut the back door so that it was secure. And one of the things that we found in the DEF CON presentation really goes into some deep detail about the problems that exist, et cetera. Now, I'm particularly perturbed that the response by John Deere was, "Oh, there's no problems. We've solved them all." Unfortunately, that's just not true. And it's actually amazing to me that a corporation can flat out gaslight people like that. It's just amazing to me. I suspect in the end, it will come back to bite them.
Yeah, I remember right after a lot of the security stuff came out, there was one particular tweet that came out. It was something along the lines of, "We forecast a fresh line of BS," or something coming over the next week. And I'm just thinking, really? I mean, people just sent your team information as to how easy it is to hack into your system. You haven't responded to them yet, but you have the time to release a tweet on it. I mean, that's not really what you should do when people have proven that they can get into your systems, particularly when you're one of the largest agricultural publicly traded companies in the United States.
It is really amazing to me how brazen they are about the subject of it. And I think their recent response to the DEF CON presentation was that we increased our security by 745% over the last 6 years or so, something like that. And I'm going, well, yeah, from one person to 4, that's a big increase. But by the way, I don't know how many people they increased and those kind of things. But what's really important is it's insufficient. Whatever they're doing is not sufficient. And it is creating a liability that has never been there before. Because of their wanting the data in real time and taking it through the cell phone connection to all the machines that they have connected.
Now, at DEF CON, you had said that you had gained control of John Deere's Operations Center website and that you were able to hack the entire American food supply chain over the course of 3 months. When you say hack the American food supply chain, I think a lot of people, when they think of this, they think of a farmer in a field. They think of an area where there's a bunch of corn, you're driving stuff that looks like it's 30 or 40 years old. How do you hack the American food supply chain? What role does technology have there, and how does this open us up to attack later down the line? Because I don't think your average person really has an idea of how technology plays a role in farming.
Yeah, and Lewis, by the way, if you'd be so kind as to throw in the link to the DEF CON so that people have it, at some point when you're editing it or whatever. That'd be great. But in every one of these devices, tractors, combines, there's a device called an MTG. And that is a communication device for satellite and for over cell phone. Satellite allows for the global positioning so that you can do precision agriculture. But separately from that, for the most part, is a cell phone SIM card. So it's, if you will, a cell phone that is built into all of these machines. And so anytime you're turning it on and you're running in the field, you are connected to the internet, you're connected to John Deere. And that's the place where the lack of security really becomes a problem. Think of it as a supply chain hack, if you will.
Okay, so let's say you're able to hack into this and hack into, how the GPS works and everything like that. How would that, hypothetically speaking, if a foreign power wanted to screw over our food supply, how would they be able to do so using these exploits, and how would that affect your average American consumer? Because when I speak about this stuff from the consumer electronics standpoint, I always try to speak about it in specific terms as to how it's going to affect people. Because the sad thing is most people don't care about serious issues until it actually affects them, until they get told that something that should cost 50 or $100 is going to cost, $1,000 or $2,000. Once people can make that personal connection, they kind of understand it. So how could this personally affect your average American consumer?
Well, there's a number of ways, but you have to remember timing is a critical element in agriculture. You basically have 2-3 weeks to harvest, 3-4 weeks maybe to plant. So if there is an attack, let's just say some form of utilization of these vulnerabilities, a malicious actor could shut down even a small percentage of production, could have a real leveraged effect within the markets, and prices could go up. So think of the idea of, let's see, somebody throws a code inside of a tractor that turns off the tractor, which, by the way, happens when parts go bad. And that's driving farmers crazy. But if you did it with a software code and you did it with 3, 5, 7% of the tractors that are out in the field, or the combines that are out in the field, you've got a real problem. And it takes a whole lot of work to fix that particular problem. And during harvest, there's not a lot of available technicians that can come out and fix things like that, because they're already busy fixing all the problems that just normally exist. So it's important to understand is small attacks could have large, significant effects.
I remember seeing Kenny emailing state senators and people on all these different committees over just about the past year about this constantly, over and over and over again, saying that this is a serious problem. Particularly when you consider that John Deere was refusing at the time to say whether or not they had handed over their source code to the Chinese government, which is somewhat adversarial to our interests at this point in time. Why is it that nobody seems to care? Why is it that this seems to fall on deaf ears, particularly in an area where agriculture and farming is so much of their GDP?
Well, it's kind of like any warning system that we have, or any possible problem that we have. It's hard for people to get their heads around it. It's really hard to kind of understand it. And if you don't understand the technology, and if you don't understand how easy it is to make these things happen, you kind of dismiss it as this kind of wild theory. And the problem for me on this one is when organizations like John Deere or Case or Klaus or any of the other ones just say, oh, don't worry about it, it's fine. They have a history of being honorable and they're playing off of it. And so there's a real confusion of, well, how could this possibly happen? And I understand people not getting down deep into the details of this thing, because it can get very confusing, especially in the cyber world where there's this incredible language that you kind of have to learn. I mean, for me, it's kind of learning Portuguese. It's like, what? But anyways, so I don't blame people for kind of going, I don't understand. But that's what the job is of people like me and Kevin Kenny is to go and bring it to people so that they understand it, so they get a real sense of it. And by the way, the ransomware attack at JBS was a real awakening in my mind for agriculture. Here it was, a company who controls over 25% of the beef processing in agriculture for the United States got shut down by a group, or Colonial Pipeline. I mean, I think we're really starting to come to understand in real terms what this kind of situation could bring. Now, will it happen? I don't know. And that's part of the problem. You can't say on next week, Tuesday, this is going to happen. And I don't want to be the guy that when it does happen goes, see, I told you so. We want to be out there working for solutions now. And I understand that there's a process that we need to go through, and people need to be educated in the process of how this could happen. That's what we're about. And this kind of show is an important show to make that happen, frankly.
What do you think is going to be required for John Deere to actually take security seriously? Because I remember when not Kevin, it was somebody else had said these are all the issues. They said, yeah, can you just send it to our social media team? And you're like, really? You mean an inbox that multiple people are monitoring that have no security clearance? You want me to show you how to hack your system through there? So it just didn't seem like they were taking it seriously for a fairly long period of time. What point will people start taking it seriously? What has to actually happen?
Well, you bring up a really good question. What is it going to take? And I don't know the answer to that question. It seems obvious to you, and it seems obvious to me. It seems particularly obvious after Colonial Pipeline, after SolarWinds, after JBS, that it's something that's very, very important. I'm afraid that one of the things that's true is, if you look at really talented people who can deal with cybersecurity, working for John Deere is not necessarily high on their list. You've got Google, you've got all kinds of companies that are probably ahead, A, of John Deere, but also B, paying more money. And I think it actually comes down to when it's going to start hitting their bottom line, when it's going to start affecting their stock price, that's when they're going to start to pay attention.
Well, you make a good point, which is many of the people who are qualified security professionals and hackers may want to prefer to work for Google or Microsoft or something than John Deere. But I've seen John Deere's net profit margins. They should have the money to be able to say, we'll outpay what you'll get at Google, even if you're going to be working on a project that may be a little bit more boring. It's a strange, and also, would you say with regards to the Colonial Pipeline makes sense? But to my knowledge, the Colonial Pipeline happened before some of these hacks happened at John Deere, and before they were just brushing it off and saying we don't care. So,
well, first of all, you've got to realize John Deere has a much different culture and has a very long history of bringing people up through the organizations and promoting them within. It's a different culture for them to go out and hire hot talent, let's say it that way. Okay. And by the way, one of the things that happened right after we gave them our vulnerabilities, they immediately listed a whole bunch of new positions for cybersecurity. So
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that on their site. A bunch of them went up right after that had come out.
Yeah.
And it said
So
like,
I mean,
ready to start immediately. And it's like, yeah, I can imagine.
yeah. So I mean, the interest is there possibly, but really getting your arms around the whole process is going to be very difficult, and it's not necessarily a skill set that John Deere has at this particular time. And that's one of the things that I find pretty confusing is if they did a real root analysis of what their problems are, they would be embracing people like that at the DEF CON presentation and Sick Codes did. They'd be embracing what he's doing and really giving him significant rewards, not just offering him T-shirts and hats. By the way, the HackerOne bug bounty program, you get hats and T-shirts with John Deere logo on them.
That's not worth the average. Yeah, that's not worth someone's time. If they're going to spend hours and hours and hours detailing not only how to break into your system, but specifically what has to be done to correct it and create a report and all of this, they don't want a T-shirt. You're worth over $200 billion. They want some money.
And that's just not the sociology currently of John Deere, and because they are very much want to have it internal to themselves, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing on their part. I'm just saying it's the way that they work, and they may need to change that point of view going forward.
I correct myself, $120 billion market cap. Either way, you need more than a T-shirt. I mean, okay. Do you think that this will change before it's too late? Do you think that this will change before there is an actual disruption to the food supply?
I don't. I know that sounds a little pessimistic.
Sounds a lot pessimistic, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm a very optimistic guy. I think that the momentum going forward and the amount of issues that John Deere has at this particular point, and by the way, I say John Deere, I also will include Case IH, I'll include Klaus, all of them. The amount of issues that they have and how new they really are to this whole world of digitization, it just seems inevitable to me.
So is this more of a cultural problem than a money problem, where you have a company that is used to going and dealing with rural farmers, and now they're having to deal with a world of cybersecurity, which is kind of more of what you would expect out of Silicon Valley than Lincoln, Nebraska, or someplace in Montana? Is it like a cultural issue more than just a greed and a money issue, do you think?
I think that's part of the equation. And I think that needs to be examined and looked at, and how do you fit that into the current culture of the organization? I mean, there's no doubt that John Deere builds great metal. They do a great job with metal. They don't do so well with software, and it's going to be some real work. It's going to be some and costly, quite frankly, for them to actually do the work that I think needs to be done. Would I love it if they beat the cyber criminals to it? Absolutely. I'm just not optimistic at this point, given their responses to date. Now, mind you, they are a publicly traded company. They have a responsibility to their shareholders and stakeholders for their stock price, et cetera. But I do know that their CEO, back on June 2nd, when he was awarded his stock options, sold every one of them for on the order of $14 million.
That demonstrates confidence in or lack of in either your company or the market in particular, or both.
Yeah, I mean, for years, executive comp guys have always justified large salaries for CEOs to, quote, make them owners, to act as owners. But, when you first get those options, and you just dump them, it really is a question in my mind. And, I've talked with a few friends of mine, like entire retired executive at Vanguard. And, he was like, ooh, ouch. I mean, yes, he has the right to do that. Yes, it's not, there's no illegality in it, but I just think it's not quite the right way to go about the process.
What? How do you? How could bridges be built between people that work in the cybersecurity, that work in software development, and these types of companies that have existed for 100 years, dealing with rural farmers before there is some sort of large crisis, outside of just public humiliation after they get hacked time and time and time again?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, um, John Deere, in its documentation, does talk about the use of GPL software and open source software within their products. So John Deere is reaching out to the community for software support, etc. They're not so good. As a matter of fact, they're probably violating the copyrights or the copylefts, if you will, of open source software about sharing what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so, they kind of consider the software that they take, the open source software that they take and modify, they consider it proprietary and that they get to make the money on it, which is part of the process. But then again, is the license agreements on open source software have requirements that you share the code, that what you've done. And I think if John Deere really wanted to harden all of their software, they could start with all of the open source software that they have and put it out into the community, and there would be a plethora of people who would contribute to making it much harder from the cyber point of view.
What would the disadvantage of that be to them?
Well, the disadvantage to that is there's some margin and some investment that they've made, and there's some internal rate of return calculations that they've made about specific products that they would have to sacrifice. Just for your listeners, oftentimes in a corporation of that size, when someone is proposing a particular project, let's say a new monitor inside of a cab, they're going to look at, and ultimately the decision, or one of the elements of the decision, is what is the internal rate of return on the money that we're going to invest into this project. And there's a set number that's known within John Deere by its engineers, typically not known outside, that says, okay, I need X as an internal rate of return. And, their products have to last for decades. So those decisions last for a long time. And if they didn't make that initial assessment properly, they are not going to meet their internal rate of return numbers. And for any project manager, that's not a good thing within Deere. You don't get promoted if you have consistently bring in projects that don't meet that kind of criteria.
But so it seems like an incentive structure problem where if you don't meet those particular numbers, you get in trouble. However, if there's an issue with regards to security, that could be some other project manager's problem.
And that's how complex this problem is. And that's why, for me, I'm trying to focus on as many details as possible on right to repair within the agricultural industry. Okay, I totally understand and have sympathy with cell phones or computers and all those kinds of things. But really, to get down deep and to understand the problem, you need to know some of these details. You need to know the detail of what a payload file is for a repair. And why is it that it requires a dealer's technician to install what in essence is a printer driver to complete the repair. So, and until we understand those kind of details, and quite frankly, until the people who are representing the farmers, like the Nebraska Farm Bureau or the Farmers Union, until they have real understanding of how that process works, they don't understand why this is such a big deal. And for the last 8 months, I've been working very closely with people in the agricultural world and trying to describe to them the details that are required to make a repair complete and functional in the agricultural world.
Well, one thing that appears to have been a solution for some of these appears to be when people get voted out. So there was this one in a person. I remember there's one person who appears to be sponsoring this legislation now. What's his name? Tom Brandt, who ran against one of the people who laughed us out of the room in 2017. I mean, that appears to be a path going forward. If you can't get them to understand it, get the voters to understand why it's an issue, so that they can then vote in politicians that understand why it's an issue.
Yeah, and I have great respect for Senator Brandt. It's great because he is a farmer,
Yeah, I
and
saw he
so
voted out, I think, Laura Epke, but yeah, and he co-sponsored the bill that she and Senator Chambers laughed out of the room,
yeah,
which is great.
yeah, and so I think Senator Brandt is a real advocate for right to repair, and I think he's going to be critical for us in agriculture to get some real results. Quite frankly, I'm very interested to see, having been to Illinois and other states and talked to legislators, it is very interesting to me how tepid they seem to be. But now that we've had the Massachusetts, the second right to repair um, um, ballot initiative voted on in Massachusetts back in November, where 74.97% of the people voted in favor of it, even though $25 million was spent on an ad campaign by the opponents. I mean, that's a very stark set of numbers for politicians to see and understand, and that's enormously helpful, quite frankly. So we're going to go through and we're going to continue to work the legislation, but don't fool yourself. Because legislation gets passed on right to repair doesn't mean we've solved the problem, because there will be a big fight, like there is now in Massachusetts, in a court case where the Automobile Manufacturers Association, brought a court case against this ballot initiative, saying, "Oh no, this isn't possible to get done in time," or "This isn't I mean, we have to continue on all fronts with this initiative.
Yeah, it's sad to see how that fight is turning out. And we're supposed to hear back in about a month in the Massachusetts one as to whether or not this preempts federal law. And if it does, it gets tossed out. I mean, from what I'm hearing from rumors, they're saying, okay, cool, you threw it out last time, we'll spend 25 million again. Because I believe the opposition spent around 25 or 26 million, but the side that was for it spent 25 or 26 million as well. Because unlike the people in the, I don't know, cell phone repair industry, the automotive repair industry actually has some good money behind it. It's not all just like mom and pops that just started up a laptop repair store because they got fired from Walmart or Model Sporting Goods. And I've heard, they're willing to just go to the mat again. Okay, cool. We'll be on the ballot in 2024 and just modify it this way so that it is in compliance. They're not giving up. But yeah, you are right there in that even if this does get passed into law, they're going to be challenging it for years and years on end. And that's years and years that just farmers and also food consumers just don't have. So where can people find you, your work, and just everything that you have to say on this?
I'm a board member of Repair.org. So Repair.org is a great resource for all of that. And, if people want to email me directly, my email address is very simple. It's williecade@gmail.com.
Thank you
And
so
I
much for
know,
taking the
and I
time.
know that you have a very large audience, and I may get a flood of emails, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're gonna get it. I have about 2 to 3 thousand unread emails in the inbox of the email that I make public at any given time. Uh, the,
I
the
understand. It's you know, I really appreciate people's passion on this. And what is useful for me are specific stories of, frankly, what are illegal activities. The Sherman Act back in 2 centuries ago made it illegal to tie a service to a sale. And I don't know how John Deere is getting around it, but it's clearly what they're doing on the repair, and the requirement of a payload file is clearly tying.
Can you give just one basic example so that people who've never operated a tractor or been on a farm in their life understand what you mean when you say they're tying the repair via the payload file when you're replacing something? Can you just give an example of like a basic repair that a farmer's going to have to do and how this screws them?
Well, actually, one of the common repairs that happens is there's a sensor called a moisture sensor, and it gives data to the tractor, and it helps it perform its work. If a moisture sensor breaks and you need to put a new one in, it's likely that you're going to need a new payload file. In other words, that piece of information, that set of code, has to go. The information on what it needs goes to the dealer's technician's laptop, who then sends it to corporate John Deere. John Deere does some internal machinations, i.e., encrypting it, sends it back to that technician's laptop, and that laptop can install it into the tractor. So it's tied, that particular kind of repair is tied to John Deere, and only John Deere can do it.
When did this begin? Because obviously this was not the case when your grandfather was working at John Deere. But like, when did this start to slowly creep into the process?
Well, it really started around 2010 was really when the planning started to happen, but it really started to come into the machines about 2015. Now, interestingly enough, given that most farm equipment has a 20-year or so life cycle, it's only now that farmers and ranchers are really starting to feel the effect of this. Let's call it 25% of their equipment has this kind of technology in it. And interestingly enough, older equipment, the prices on that are going through the roof.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
insane.
so it's a process. And one of the things that somebody said to me, well, they could just go down the street and buy somebody else's equipment. Well, if you've invested in a $500,000 combine or a $500,000 tractor, and you're expecting it to go for the next 20 years, you can't go down the street for the next 20 years in this kind of a case. So, and that's the particularly difficult part for the farmers at this point. And John Deere, Case IH, they are dominant in the industry. Period.
We talk about John Deere a lot, but you made mention that there are other manufacturers that do similar things. Is this similar to my industry where I go over Apple because they're one of the worst offenders, but almost every company is kind of doing something similar, and if not doing something similar right now, would be expected to be doing something similarly nasty 6 to 18 months down the line?
Yeah, and I thank you, Lewis, for bringing that up. Because I do tend to use John Deere as the example, but you're absolutely right. It's exactly like what you said. It's like Apple. They're the leader. They're the firm that is out there for good or ill. They're the ones who are the lightning rods on this.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain all this in the finer points to the audience. I'll include a link down below to the DEF CON link that you talked about so that people who are more interested in the specific security flaws and how all this all worked can read up on it. And yeah, thank you very much for showing up.
Oh, my pleasure, Lewis. Keep up the good work.
All right, you have a good day. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.